Hello everyone, today we will be talking about randomization. So what is randomization? Randomization is the process of assigning study subjects to interventions or different treatment arms in a random manner. The main purpose of it is to prevent allocation bias, which is a type of selection bias. It is the best way to ascertain that the intervention that is being tested is related to the outcome of interest and that treatment arms are balanced between them. So what are the different types of randomization methods? There are four main types of randomization methods that we can use in clinical research. First of all, we have simple randomization. This method involves assigning participants to different treatment groups using a method that ensures that each participant has an equal chance of being assigned to any of the treatment groups. It is done based on an arbitrary sequence of assignments, and the most simple and popular example that there is the flipping of a coin. Advantages of this randomization method are that it is easy to carry out, it is inexpensive, and it allows for allocation concealment. Disadvantages are that if a small sample size is used, there can be imbalances in groups in terms of number of participants and in terms of baseline characteristics. Next off, we have block randomization. In this one, participants are allocated to different intervention blocks that have a predetermined number of subjects. So this method is particularly useful in small studies, but it is important to ensure a balanced allocation of participants to treatment groups. Participants in this method are divided into blocks of a specific size, and the allocation of participants to treatment groups is randomized within each block. For instance, so if the block size is 4, the participants would be divided into groups of 4, and each group would be randomly allocated to one of the treatment groups. This process of assigning participants is repeated until all participants have been allocated to a treatment group. What are the pros and cons? So the main advantage of this method is that it ensures a balanced number of participants in each group. And disadvantages are that it is a more complex method than simple randomization. It requires careful planning and calculation of the block size. And another limitation is that it may be vulnerable to manipulation if the allocation sequence is not kept concealed from the study team. Baseline covariates can also be unbalanced between groups if they are not considered in the randomization process. Next, we have stratified randomization. This method plans to ensure balance between treatment groups for specific factors or characteristics that can potentially influence the study outcomes. In this method, participants are divided into subgroups or strata based on baseline characteristics. So if we see on the right, we have an example of 2 baseline characteristics that are being taken into account at the time of randomization in a study. So we have sex and BMI. And from these 2 covariates, we have 6 different combinations that give us like the 6 different strata from which we are going to derive our participants or randomize them into groups. So each participant in each of these groups is then randomized by simple randomization to their treatment arms until we have assigned all of them to one. The pros of this randomization method are that it ensures balanced groups in terms of size and baseline covariates. But if too many strata are used, it can lead to the complete opposite, which is unbalanced groups and loss of power to detect differences between them. There are higher chances of imbalances when the number of strata is greater than half of the sample size. And to be able to handle this, we can use alternatives such as minimization, which you will see in depth later on, or to predetermine a statistical adjustment for key baseline covariates that can influence the primary endpoint. Last but not least, we have adaptive randomization. It encompasses all computerized methods of randomization that allocate participants into groups based on previously assigned subjects. Advantages of this method are that it helps have balanced groups in terms of covariates and allows for large numbers of baseline characteristics to be taken into account. However, it is very expensive, it is very complex to carry out, and it is also prone to selection bias because allocation can be predicted based on the previous participant that was allocated. So what is the best method of randomization that we can choose? So there is no absolute best method for randomization. In general, any method can work well in a trial with a large sample size. So if sample size is our main parameter to decide, then we can say that if we have a small sample size of roughly less than 100, we would prefer a simple randomization. If our sample size is big enough, then we have to ask ourselves if there are any important baseline covariates. If that is not the case, then we can proceed by choosing blocked randomization that can balance our groups in terms of number. But if there are certainly covariates that can influence our outcome, then we need to know how many of them there are. If there are no more than 2, then we can use stratified randomization. But if there are more than 2 or 3, we would prefer adaptive randomization. At last, then what is the randomization method that is appropriate for a given study? So when assessing a randomization method, we have to remember to consider the methods of the study. So we have to assess if the method choice is adequate for sample size and study characteristics. To do this, we can look at the paper's table 1 and tell if groups are balanced in terms of covariates. And also, we have to evaluate if there are any potential confounders that we can think of aside from those baseline characteristics. And this is it for today. Hope you find this video useful. These are some of the references.